And go live.
We're
LA
live.
style. You always
And
get
we're
a
already
little late.
This is going to be hot. This is going to be great. All right. Well, I want to start off real quickly, just while everybody's rolling in. I saw there were a ton of people waiting. I want to hear the origin story of Viva and Barnes.
Okay, we were discussing, we haven't gotten to the origin story before. We were discussing another hot topic. Origin story, Robert, I think you saw at one point my analysis of the Alex Jones deposition.
And yes, that was my introduction to Viva.
And you were in the deposition, right?
Yeah, I'm the lawyer. He didn't know I was the lawyer, obviously. and I didn't know that I hadn't seen Viva's channel. And so I think maybe at that time it was like 60,000 followers, subscribers, something like that. I mean, it's really exploded. But it was the best analysis of the deposition, because all the other analysis, they all hate Alex Jones. So they were just bashing on Jones. Sure. And to me, that the Jones's lawyer, no, not Jones's lawyer, the plaintiff's lawyer was mental. I'm currently not involved in the case, so I can say these things, because if I said him I was involved in the case, he'd go screaming to the judge, "Please prevent Barnes from talking about me." My joke about him was that the taxi cab driver was supposed to drop him off at the mental institution and accidentally dropped him off to law school. That's how he got his law degree.
For anybody, if anybody doesn't remember it, I mean, I had no idea who Barnes was at the time. During the deposition, at one point, I heard the other lawyer say, "I appreciate your work, Mr. Barnes." Didn't know who it was. But all I heard, that lawyer, the plaintiff's lawyer, who stitched together video evidence of different streams and different casts, and then was asking questions on it as though it was a one entire episode from Alex Jones. I mean, it was basic evidentiary problems that you don't walk into for a deposition. As a lawyer, you don't piece together the evidence that you want to ask the witness questions on. So it was like 101. It was the first real vlog that I did. That was when everything blew up. It got 250,000 views. YouTube originally flagged it, took it down, put it back up, remonetized it. It made for drama within itself.
Oh yeah, that's when I met you.
Yeah, it was roughly the same time.
That was the exact same week I met you, because remember, you came on the show, and the next day you had your video removed, and they wouldn't explain it, and you came up a week later. Wow, crazy timing.
Timing was amazing, and I didn't know Robert saw it until, it was a little while later on Twitter. I think that's where we first made our connection. And that was it. Then we became friends on Twitter. Robert agreed to do a live stream with me. We did one live stream, which was the first. And it
was the Covington kids, though, right?
Oh, say that again?
It was the Covington kids, right? Because Barnes was a lawyer for the Covington kids, and you were doing analysis. And if I recall, you were excited, like, I might get their lawyer on, Barnes, to talk about this. Was that when it?
That was it. The first stream we did, I have to refresh my memory, but the first stream I know we did was on the Covington kids, and Robert Barnes in general. And then it became a thing where, like, we can discuss these weekly. We can go over the week's news in a weekend live stream where everybody can get their questions in, because there's only so much that I know and can do in a week.
Sure.
And it's just blossomed into something totally amazing.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to have you guys here. I even upped my game, had to put a collar on because the Dapper Barnes is here, and fantastic shirt. I actually have that one too. But this is awesome. I want to start out while I wait for some of the questions to come in. Edward Snowden. Have you guys heard about that? It just went down overnight or yesterday.
What part?
The what was it? The surveillance program that he reported. Apparently, the courts came back and said, "Oh, hell no."
What the Ninth Circuit did is classic Ninth Circuit, by the way. The way they split the baby, so they said, "Oh, this is really, really illegal," but we're not going to suppress any of the evidence obtained from this illegality. So it had no consequence for the defendants. It was a great ruling for public policy purposes, a great ruling for prospective purposes. Probably will go up en banc. No, I'm sorry. I think that was en banc. It'll probably go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the way they split the baby was ludicrous. Increasingly, they're saying it's okay to violate the Constitution because we're not going to suppress anything, because that's a prophylactic rule, which was one of Scalia's dumber interpretations of the Constitution. Scalia was great on some areas, atrocious on others. For people who think he was a consistent constitutionalist, no, he wasn't. My introduction to Justice Scalia was he couldn't read an invite letter to a intern conference.
I heard Thomas was the most on letter with the Constitution. Is that incorrect, or?
It depends, because he too is more consistent in terms of following through on the consequences of principles he interprets.
Mhm.
He's very good on the Fifth Amendment on testimonial issues. He's right that testimonial privilege should go beyond verbal testimony. It should include being forced to be a physical witness against yourself, such as handwriting exemplars, showing up for identifications, things like that.
Pubic hairs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, right, because of the. I never did. I never did believe any of the Anita Hill testimony. It struck me as fake. It struck me as manufactured from the get-go back then, and I was on the Democratic side of the aisle back then. In fact, I was usually on the Democratic side of the aisle until a few years ago. I didn't change; the parties changed. At least the presidential nominees for the parties changed. But so it's a very good ruling. It cites what Snowden did as part of that, recognizing that what was happening here was not legally authorized, that what was happening here did contravene the Fourth Amendment, which frankly was always obvious. What was unique here was, generally speaking, the NSA's database is not supposed to bleed over into federal criminal cases. It's supposed to solely be for counterintelligence and things of that nature. And it came out years ago, and the story blossomed and then vanished. How a whole bunch of police officers all across the nation had been committing mass perjury with parallel construction because they were receiving NSA-derived tips of tracking certain people, and they came up with fake stories as to how they pulled people over to hide the illicit source of their intel. And almost all those cases, nothing happened with them.
So it's almost like an illegal wiretap where they go follow somebody and then they go, "Oh, I just happened to see something in the car," even though they've been tapping the people forever. Only NSA is doing it.
Yes. Great from the show The Wire. And maybe Viva and I will start doing some great legal show analysis, what's accurate, what's inaccurate.
People ask for it all the time. But Robert, the ACLU tweeted this out yesterday. They said that the Court of Appeal determined that the bulk collection of data was unconstitutional. Well, I mean, now I tweeted out as a joke. Great. So now you just have to trust them to delete the information. What are they supposed to do with the information that was collected unconstitutionally?
Well, apparently you can use it in criminal trials, according to the same Ninth Circuit. So that's why it was an important on the record. We stand against this. Oh, but we're not going to actually enforce it at all.
And are we going to be seeing in the criminal courts the argument that this is the fruit? What is it called? The poison fruit of the spoiled tree?
Fruit of the poisonous tree.
Yeah. The problem is the en banc decision says suppression is not the remedy. So it says, yeah, it was illegally gathered, but you can still use it without excluding it from evidence.
Well, everybody wants to know, what are the odds of Trump pardoning Snowden and, let's say, Assange?
My interpretation of that is entirely that Trump is threatening that to get what he considers deep state actors to not interfere with the 2020 election. He won't do it before the election. He'll only do it if they do something he doesn't like.
Robert, people were asking me this, and I think I know the answer from our previous streams. With Michael Flynn, and it goes to Snowden and Assange as well. Hypothetically, whatever happens in November, Trump can pardon up until his last day in office, right?
That is correct.
So, Clinton did it. Clinton did it famously, right?
Yeah, and Poppy Bush did it. But Poppy Bush pardoned most of the key Iran-Contra people after he lost his re-election bid.
Okay, so for everybody who's saying they just want to drag Flynn out till after November, it is really irrelevant, because even if they drag it out past November, Trump can pardon up until, I don't know, what's the last day in office? January 2nd?
Inauguration day, which is January, usually 20th or 21st. So,
I mean, and that goes for Snowden, that goes for Assange. If, regardless of what happens, even if he loses in November, there's going to be November, December, January, 2 months where Trump can pardon whomever he wants. 3. Okay. Well, that's just one question.
All right. Well, we have an important question from the audience here. Well, I'm going to skip around because there's a lot out there.
I should modify that. Viva was right. Now I was right. It's 2.5 months.
Oh, I love being right on the big stuff.
All right. Viva Frei, what kind of air freshener do you use in your car when you vlog in there?
It's strictly me. Strictly me, and sometimes the air conditioning if it's too hot outside.
Oh God, do you have to blast it and then you shut it down real quick to turn on the camera and hope it doesn't overheat and then turn it back on?
When I do run the car with the AC, I just put it on low, and then I try not to do it just because I don't feel good letting the car idle with the AC on. But one way or the other. It's either that or I'm going to be in the house with the AC on. So the energy is coming from somewhere, but to the extent possible, I roll down the windows and keep it cool.
Okay, now I've got a question coming in from here, and I know that half of the internet probably would disagree with it, but I personally agree with it. And that's how do you guys try to minimize your biases? Now, I personally think especially David is one of the least biased people I've come across as far as how you represent yourself. I know you're biased, we all are, but at least the way you talk and put it out. And I think, Robert, you do a fantastic job too. You're kind of like on the opposite side of both sides.
Robert's I suspect Robert's going to say the exact same thing, but you argue what you don't believe as vigorously as you argue what you do believe to check your bias, and then ask the questions that someone would ask. You have to see, like, in areas where bias comes in and it's sort of subconscious. I guess Robert, our initial reaction to the Millie Weaver, just assuming that the charges were going to relate to theft of documents, I guess you can call that bias, although that's not politically motivated bias. It might just be
pattern recognition.
Say that again.
Pattern recognition.
Pattern recognition. Yeah, but like just running to defend Trump or running to attack Trump, that's where, or defending the indefensible when something happens would be an example of bias. Some people are going to say subject matter is evidence of bias, and I tend to cover subject matter that pleases the conservative side. Whereas, my only response to that is right now it's just the way it leans, because anything coming out of the media and anything coming out of politics tends to be on one side. So merely by virtue of what you cover or don't cover, it doesn't indicate a bias. It just indicates what is out there in terms of news.
Well, this I got to point out too, and I definitely want to hear from Barnes, but I think you would agree that David's probably the least right wing of the crazy Canadians that are out right now.
I mean, David's basically sort of like what Ruben was maybe, 4 years ago, because Ruben's become more overtly ideological by his own admission, but was that very much centrist and what used to be identified as old school liberal, really, and it's just politics in the West has just radically shifted within 4 to 5 years to what used to be liberal is now all of a sudden on the ideological spectrum within the press considered on the right. But I see him as very centrist and very independent in his perspective. I think here's my view in general. My view is that everyone's biased simply due to the limits of life experience and the limits of information we can gather. So, like, for example, I have a contrary perspective than a lot of people in terms of political disagreements. My view is that all of us think our political viewpoints or our viewpoints on anything are based on us being smart, us being knowledgeable, and us being good-hearted. So two people believe two opposite things on the left and the right, and both of them believe the opposite things from one another, but they believe those things because they're smart, knowledgeable, and good-hearted. And so there's a tendency when they disagree with one another to say, well, the other person is either first, doesn't know the facts. Second, they'll say they're brainwashed. Second, that they're simply dumb. Or third, that they're evil. When in my view, when people are arguing with each other, they're really saying, I have a different life experience than you. I trust different sources of information than you. And from that combination of different life experience and different sources of information, we've come to different conclusions about what the best policy is, what even the factual reality is. Now, the left has really increased that over the past decade or so, because the left doesn't really believe. This was the subjectivity revolution within the academy over the past quarter century, where they don't believe in empirical reality. They believe empirical reality is just power disguised as something else, and so that you create your own truth. And the subjectivity of truth that they believe in. When I was in college at Yale, I was very disturbed by this, because I was like, this is just a means of power. This is how statists and totalitarians rise. This is how evil is easily accomplished. When you no longer believe in a morally objective or empirically objective truth even existing. When you say, oh, that's just white power by disguise. Things like autopsies, like this actual headline from the Washington Post the other day, autopsies are just white power in disguise. Like, that's supposed to be a Babylon Bee parody.
No, and I had to double check that before I even. I thought it was a joke. But it's an interesting thing, like Robert, where you say truth becomes subjective. It's one of the major things that I had an issue with when someone says that they want to speak their truth as opposed to
I hate that term.
Truth.
I hate their truth. I hate that.
Now,
that's an opinion. That's an opinion.
But it's even worse than that. It's even worse than an opinion. What that indicates to me is that it's an overt internal manipulation of the truth to make it what is not the truth. They say my truth is fundamentally not the truth. And you know that that is only going to be explained by bias or by agenda. But the thing is, when it comes to bias, unless it materializes, goes unnoticed. And the only time you ask, well, what is your possible bias, is when someone espouses a view which is either emotional in nature or so detached from what is a justifiable observation that you have to then go into the motives. For example, Legal Eagle's assessment of certain issues, but primarily Captain Marvel. That was the first video where it's not even a political bias, although it underlying fundamentally is, but an interpretation which is so radically unjustifiable on its face despite the justification. And then you have to say, well, how is one getting to this underlying opinion? And then you have to sort of look to internal biases to explain the inexplicable. But otherwise, if people just attack the arguments and not the person or the person's intention, you would never know the bias, because you should be able to justify your beliefs. And then just calling it a bias becomes a cop-out, which is the major cop-out in any political discussion these days.
Everybody should be required to carry these around with them.
Open them up and show us what they look like.
The critical thinking cards. Yeah, and I think what Viva and I have are 2 additional filters, and that I recommend to people to try to filter out the subjectivity of their life experience, the subjectivity of the sources of intel and information they have for believing what is factually true or empirically accurate. And one is trial experience. As a trial lawyer, you don't get to live in the fantasy land of you only being able to present your side or your truth. The other side's going to present it. There's going to be a judge involved. In America, there's a jury involved. So you have to filter through, what's the other side going to argue? How persuasive is that going to be to a judge? How persuasive is that going to be to a jury? How persuasive in some cases is it to the court of public opinion? And for that, you need objectivity, or you will fail to do your job effectively as an advocate. And then the second part is the Scott Adams test, which is predictive qualities. It's why I challenge all the political election forecasters online to wager. It's like, it can be a dollar wager, it can be an honor wager, but have skin in the game. And here's where I agree with Nassim Taleb. I don't know if it's Taleb or Talib, even though Taleb is that guy.
Black one.
He's a complete prick. He blocked me on Twitter just because I asked him a question or two.
Blocked me on Twitter.
He's known to be just a complete asshole by the whole community. But he's also one of the most honest ones out there.
Oh, well, I was going to say it was Eric Weinstein's theory. He's like, we have to protect the assholes because they're actually often our geniuses, even if they are completely difficult to deal with. But he identified, I think correctly, that you need skin in the game in order for there to be a check, an objective filter on your biases. It becomes as a sports bettor. Sports betting is great for this, by the way. It's like you can think whatever you want, but wait until your money's on the line. And then you get disciplined by losing that money. And hopefully, you get encouraged by winning the money for some of us. So I like political betting for that same reason. I do it all. I often do sports betting solely to discipline my mental approach. And I'll look at cases I'm not part of, and I'll say, let me see if I can predict it. Let me see if I can predict it accurately. Let me see if it was part of the fun of doing the show with Viva, is to try to predict things. And the reason why we do that for people isn't to say, hey, look at how good we are, how smart we are. It's an objective filter on our own potential subjective biases.
Well, and the good thing about that is you can make a prediction you don't believe in, and you can make a prediction you disagree with. And speaking to the trial experience, it's the most, I said everyone should, like living in New York, be a lawyer for long enough to build character, but not long enough to crush your soul. Because you go into a courtroom, you don't get away with mischaracterizing or straw manning your adversary's position. You do that, you lose credibility in front of the judge, and it hurts you. So you have to present their position more honestly than they're going to do it. And you get into court, you don't get to play identity politics, and you don't get to play name calling. Oh, that's such a white male thing to do, or that's such a
God.
You cannot.
Well, it seems like you can now, though. I mean, half the time you guys are covering it, sounds like they're doing it.
Yeah, they're still legalizing it, but it's a little bit more legalese of the way they do it. But you don't get to personalize any debate based on the identity of the person presenting it in court. It's only the ideas and only the arguments, as frustrating as that is. So you don't get to tell the judge he's picking on you because the judge is French and you're English, or the judge is old and you're young. None of it. And you get used to not doing that in debate. and it makes you a more critical thinker. And the problem is people have never had that experience. They just go disqualify the person to disqualify the argument.
And that's what I tell people. If you want to watch whether someone's making a quality argument, look at how they respond to criticism. Look at how well they include the other side's opinions objectively and fairly. Because if they fail to do that, Viva and I will be talking about it more on Sunday in detail. The Sixth Circuit came down today with a decision saying congressmen are immune in my Covington kids case. I'm going to take it up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But a little giveaway when you read the opinion, go back and people can listen to the oral argument and note how the written opinion doesn't seem to address a single one of my arguments that I made at the oral argument, and instead addresses scarecrow arguments that I never even made. Now, why would I take that as an encouraging sign for a possible Supreme Court review? It means they didn't have good answers to my arguments. If you have to pretend I didn't make those arguments and pretend I made other arguments, you can't have the intellectual integrity to be objective and fair about it. But what that tells me is, oh, my argument is so persuasive, you can't even answer it, and you're an appeals court judge with all the power. So pay attention to watch Legal Ego gives away his bias by anyone objective, because they can watch it and say he's not addressing the other side. I've heard the other side. I may disagree with the other side, but he's not even addressing it fairly. So I think that's a critical third test. How fair are you in your opinion or your argument to what the other side is arguing?
Have you heard of steel manning?
Yes, well, it's the opposite of straw manning. It's
exactly. Sam Harris is where I first heard it. I don't know if he came up with it, but I really, really like that principle of taking a person's argument, building it up to the strongest possible form you can, and then proceeding to go against it. So, get full agreement that that's exactly what they are saying and that you're putting it really well. I think that's awesome. Got to shout out a couple of people real quick. Sorry, David.
No, I just want to Robert Barnes is drinking Monster energy drink, by the way. Now, sorry.
I love it. The Monsters are great.
We're in trouble. No, Little Rock, thank you so much for becoming a member. And David, you'll have to look into the t-shirt situation for him.
I took a screenshot so I can do the cufflinks one day.
All right, fantastic. And then we have 4B11T Pilot. One of the highlights of my week is tuning into a bit of Frei and Barnes, learning a great deal from these two. From Viva, you learned how to say certain words in a French accent. Oh, and I want Barnes. That's it. Barnes, you got to have a Sally Yates is corrupt.
Yes, from Barnes. That Sally Yates is corrupt.
And Viva and Barnes on the back. You have to have that.
Oh, yeah. Well, Viva was trying to avoid too many political statements.
No. I put it out there.
And I'm neurotic, and I don't want to get accused of defamation. Corrupt might be, I guess it's a matter of opinion, but.
Oh, yes, it is. Sally Yates will never sue me. So you could just quote me. You could say, according to Barnes, Sally Yates is corrupt on the T-shirt, but I would love for her to sue me. I would get to prove she's corrupt in court. But I represented years ago a whistleblower who figured out the way he could finally get into court. He'd been railroaded every way to Sunday. Was he created a website with the company he was targeting and created the symbol was I can say now is a Little Debbie sign, and the Little Debbie image he kept changing into a skull and bones connected to what he was alleging was environmental pollution. And his whole thing was, I just got to get them to sue me because then I can finally prove all the corruption I've been documenting over my life. And they tried to railroad this little guy. He was a little whistleblower guy. You look like Jerry Lee Lewis. You first meet him, you think he's crazy. Turned out he's very nice, very sincere guy. I remember he had doubts about whether I worked for another street lawyer at the time, and he had doubts whether we were taking the case seriously. And sometimes I had a tendency back then to keep all my thoughts in my own head and not share it with a client. And so he started asking me details about the case, and I knew more about his case than anyone ever had, and even things he didn't know. And so by the end of it, he said, wow, he goes, I was worried. You're totally legit. And I was a kid, and I realized, okay, that's important to share that information with clients. It was like when I was representing clients, I have restless leg syndrome, which actually is good for energy, supposed to be good for the brain, just for people out there.
With the monster drink. Good.
Yeah, the monster drink to it, right? So I would go into court. I was representing all victims of domestic violence, and I remember I had to represent this client that was maybe like 5'2", little blonde lady, and this is the first time she's met me because that's how I worked for like a public interest law firm. We would just show up on late notice, 48-hour notice, 24-hour notice to appear for an order of protection hearing, and you had to do a trial. Basically, you had to prepare for a trial within an hour and then do the trial. So it was great training from a legal professional perspective. It was right in the lion's den. and she's sitting next to me, and I have my usual leg just going boom, 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 boom. And she's just like, she's got this kid lawyer. He's got sneakers on with his suit. His leg is going up and down. I'm totally screwed. She thought she was done until I got up there. And when the show is, I'm like always nervous and edgy. I'm always, before the show starts, I'm like, why am I here? Why do I do trial work? Why do I go through this? All this anxiety. And then once the lights are on, there's something that just flips a switch.
What's your
and
mood?
all of a sudden, it's a different ball game.
Do you get pissed? Do you get like a righteous indignation? What I'm curious because I love the idea of mentality.
I think my whole family participated in plays and public speaking from the time they were young. So my first speech was when I was 10 years old. I tried to memorize it the night before. I got up there and saw these people looking back at me and ran off the stage crying. So that was my first public speaking event. But I kept forcing myself to do it, and I had an older brother, older sisters that kept pushing me forward. And I got very, very good at it. And so by the time I was 12, 13, we started winning a lot of awards. I had one award taken away from me because I couldn't quit laughing at this other kid's speech who confused nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. But, they love me. I was like, it's not my fault. That was an unintentionally comedic speech. I obviously didn't intend it to be comedic, but fusion and fission don't go together. So by the time I was 15, 16, it became secondhand that once the lights were on, it was like I was performing a different person. I'm in the moment, and I'm so in the moment that nothing else exists. But leading up to it, and after it, I'm often exhausted. Leading up to it, I'm nerve-wracked. But once it starts, all of the nervousness vanishes. I'm just in the moment.
It's amazing. It's the exact experience I had with litigation, with one caveat. But my colleague, the lady I used to work with, called me a bird. She personified all humans as animals, and I was a bird. And she said whenever I started going to court or did a deposition, my feathers would go up, and I would put on the show, and then afterwards the feathers go down, and that's it. My only problem, Robert, is that you'd have the sleepless nights before the trial. You would get you'd have your climax of a trial, the thing that all lawyers wait for. I never felt I was never. It's not that I was never happy with it. It's like it was always anticlimactic, and it was always so frustrating beyond words when all of the hard work does not pay off the way you think it should. And it's not a question of being biased for your own case. You just don't think the outcome reflects justice, and then you sort of just feel double exhausted because it's all for naught. And like now, I haven't read through the entire Covington decision, but I heard you plead, Robert. I know what I think, and I know what I thought. But just to see just to have this judgment come down that doesn't address the substantive bulk of the arguments, it's too frustrating for me to deal with. And I get much more pleasure out of the analysis than the participation. Even though I still have, you get your feathers on when I get into my car to do the vlogs and the live streams. It's just I get a different pleasure and I get a different satisfaction, and I feel a different sense of accomplishment from this versus what Robert does. I couldn't do it after 12 years. It was enough.
Yeah, it definitely requires a mindset shift, particularly if you're going to do underdog cases like the kind of cases I do. My anthem song is Frank Sinatra's "My Way." So when they do my obituary and when they put my gravestone up, it's that "My Way" is going to be the song, and the "My Way" is going to be on the gravestone, because everything about that song is exactly me in terms of what I aspire to and how I try to approach things. And there's a line in there about how, sometimes I bit off more than I can chew. You may have known it, but when there's doubt, I eat it up and I spit it out. It's like that's been my whole mindset. But you can trace my mindset and mantra by Frank Sinatra's "My Way." But you almost have to take that approach. You don't have much choice. Otherwise, you get a lot of gut punches. You get a lot of the law school in America, probably like Canada, teaches you to believe in the law. You get into the actual legal system and you start to see the law often not matter. You see the facts often not matter. You see justice often not matter.
Yeah, no. I mean, even worse than that, you see deliberate misuse of the procedure in order to obtain strategic advantages, posturing for negotiation when it's fundamentally unlawful or fundamentally unjust, but it's just the nature of the game. What was the other thing? The actual state of the practice for me, you see the politics of law firms, and you see the politics of the practice, and how the lawyers. This is not necessarily where I was, but you see it in court. Young underlings who are being sent to do the dirty work that they know a judge would chew a senior lawyer out for, and they don't have to deal with it. So there's a number of things that the practice is soul crushing in the long run. And I wish, like Robert, I could have enjoyed it.
That sounds like underage drug dealers. You send them out so they don't have to do the full sentence.
And they get chewed out. They get embarrassed in front of the court. I was in court looking at stagiaires who clearly had no knowledge of the file. They were dumped the file in the morning. The senior lawyer gives them a 30-second rundown of what the judge is going to ask, which never happens.
What's a stagiaire?
An intern or someone who's doing their internship, or even a young lawyer, but someone who clearly no involvement of, no knowledge of the file, of the intricacies of the file. Their prep with the senior lawyer was 5 minutes. It's just a simple motion, go to court, and the judge is going to ask you X, Y, and Z. When the questions go beyond the X, Y, and Z, the stagiaire, the intern, the young lawyer has no idea of the answers. They get chewed out. I've been in there where the judge says, go out, call the senior lawyer. I don't care if he's busy, get him down or her down here, because this isn't how it works. But you see that more often than not at court, and it would not leave you with a good taste in your mouth as to the system being a system of justice.
Well, if people want to see, sorry, go ahead, Eric.
No, go for it.
Oh, if people want to get a real education on the practice of law through Hollywood, there are some realistic programs.
Really?
Shows like Better Call Saul. That's how a lot of street criminal defense gets done. Shows like some of it I find deeply comedic, but because his ability to work the system is fantastic in my view. A lot of people are morally horrified by it, and it's like, not if you realize who he's going up against. Lincoln Lawyer, very well done, both the books and the film.
Bosch on that note, it's not law, but it's still cool.
Yes, it is. Bosch is a fantastic TV show, and also realistic in many respects. The show Damages, excellent, very well done for high-end civil litigation. The show Billions, for criminal cases, white-collar criminal cases, extraordinarily apt and accurate. Parts of Ray Donovan that portray parts of the legal system, very apt and accurate.
I always said a civil action was my most realistic, but I haven't seen it now in long enough that my memory might not be clear on it. But I always thought at the time that was the most accurate reflection of my experience with law. A little Hollywood dramatized in terms of them shutting down the lights of the defense attorney or the plaintiff's attorneys, but the practice and opposing counsel, Robert Duvall, in that was the most accurate representation of a lawyer that I have in my experience at the time.
Especially a skilled one. That actually happened to that plaintiff's lawyer. He went broke and moved to Hawaii. He was on top of the world, and the lights literally went out because he just thought he could do the same in environmental torts. But yeah, civil and The Verdict and Injustice for All. The Verdict I love because written by David Mamet, my favorite writer, who's a combined screenwriter, and his book, Three Uses of the Knife, was
He's taken your path. Actually, David Mamet has taken your political path, so to speak, or at least has been standing still while the Overton window has been, smashed.
If people want to, it was critical to my legal education was Three Uses of the Knife, because it's him talking about a blues song that has three uses of a knife in the blues song, and he talks about the neurological need for narrative, and that we can't simply say car, knife, road. We can't even talk about eating without I was eating, We describe it. We put everything within a story framework. And once I understood that, there's also a good legal book out written by trial lawyers about what they call the reptile brain. That is very good for understanding how people's psychology and survivalism works. I found it incredibly helpful for political betting, but it's also very good for understanding what a judge is likely to do. Like, for example, when I had the oral argument in the Sixth Circuit case, it was not in my interest to publicly disclose it, but it was clear to me that other than the Trump judge, I was up against it. I am surprised that the Trump judge folded like a willow, but that's for another story for another day. Not a shock. A lot of Trump judges are not that strong. They're not like Rao, who has kept to her guns in the Flynn case. There's many of them that have just capitulated and gone home because that's the nature of the system. Just like they haven't made as much ruckus as they could have at the Supreme Court level. Gorsuch has, but Kavanaugh's been pretty weak on some of the pandemic-related cases. And I think what you have to be is realistic. We're governed by men, recognize that reality, while at the same time realize that there's strengths there. There's ways to work that. There's ways to work judges. There's ways to work juries. There's ways to work the court of public opinion. And as the two great schools of learning can never be closed, that's the archives of nature and the conscience of man. And as long as those two schools of learning are open, there's always a chance for justice. As long as there's a chance for justice, you might as well fight for it if you can.
I have a feeling this isn't one of the more legal or accurate shows.
Which one? Boston Legal is my favorite by far. If I could be a lawyer, I would do everything that James Spader's character in Boston Legal does. Unfortunately, I would be in jail quite frequently if I did everything he did. But that is my model. I love, also because it's realistic. It doesn't have any of the naivete, any of the delusional aspects. It portrays judges as a wide range. Good, bad, crazy, sane, moral, corrupt, because that's humanity and that's who sits on the bench. Disproportionately, the kind of people who want to sit on the bench are not going to be your best people. That's just political reality. Because some people want to sit on the bench because they really want to do good. Some people sit on the bench because they love power for its own sake. And that's the second category is your problem.
Well, actually, now I was talking about this with someone who I was just at court with, but the reality is judges get paid a lot and they have a lot of good benefits, and they get paid in Canada $290,000 a year for a superior court judge. They get paid for the rest of their lives. When they pass away, their spouses get paid for the rest of their lives. But the reality is,
but that's Canadian dollars, so it's not quite as intense.
And by the way, that's Viva may know, but that's higher paid than almost every state judge in America.
Maybe, I mean, bring it down by it's like 210,000 US, but
the average in the US is like 100, is often under 100, but it's usually 110, 120, and they don't get paid for life.
And that's actually quite low. But you bear in mind, a good lawyer or a fancy lawyer at a fancy firm, they'll make 500,000, $1 million a year, easy, if not more. So the question is, the most skilled and the most accomplished lawyers are getting paid over $1 million a year. Yeah. You have to have a very strong desire for justice to take a pay cut of that degree to go be a judge. And then the flip side is the people who are taking a pay raise to go become judges are not necessarily going to be the most accomplished. And so there's a joke in the industry that it's not necessarily the best lawyers, the most competent lawyers that become judges. And
that's half of it. And the other half of it is the few who will take a big pay cut. Like in the States, a lot of your federal judges do take big pay cuts. Why do they do it? And some will do it for justice, but many will do it because they love that power. And you'll often see them become power freaks when they get on the bench. I got an old close friend that sits on the federal bench. And whenever I see him, I'm always reminding him of that, stay balanced, stay centered, stay focused. I mean, he grew up a blue collar country kid. So I think he has a way above average chance of being a very good judge. Brother-in-law is a state court judge, and, same way, came from small town Tennessee. Very, very, both of them are extremely intelligent, scholarship award winners in school. And they will be very fair judges, but overwhelmingly, I would say most of the judges I've met, I used to say all I wanted was a judge who was either smart or moral. If I get one that's both, it's a unicorn experience.
Well, there we go. To get some more questions, this one is up a while ago, but I believe Barnes, you told a story about it, and I don't know if this is right, but didn't Julian Assange reveal Hillary Clinton's emails? And I don't quite think that's accurate, right?
It's WikiLeaks. And those WikiLeaks disclosed a bunch of the DNC emails and not Hillary Clinton's emails. He never found Hillary Clinton's personal emails or her State Department emails. The only emails he found received and published were the DNC emails and John Podesta's emails. Who was the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign. So that's why he's often labeled connected to Clinton emails scandal, but it's not the actual core Clinton email scandal.
And Julian Assange, as best I recall, and I recall it well because I was immensely intrigued by this. He alluded to the fact that it wasn't in fact obtained via the Russians, but it was in fact obtained via somebody else, who the DNC vehemently denied being the source of the leak. And going back, does anybody remember those John Podesta emails? Like, I don't want to get you in trouble, Eric. Does anyone remember the wording in those emails that if it wasn't about whatever it was, some people thought it was about, still make absolutely no sense as to what was being discussed in those emails, and it was code for something. It's just people have forgotten this because 4 years ago feels like an eternity.
Well, Pizzagate happened, and that overshadowed everything, because it's a horrible tragedy that went wrong. So it's, I'm guessing, and everybody can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's problematic when something bad is going on and somebody overreacts to it, which allows people to say, oh, look, it's a conspiracy nut job. Get your tinfoil hats, move on. Well, occasionally, what is it? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Exactly. And what the media does a very good job of is caricaturing a conspiracy theory in particular. So there's a great book written by a liberal scholar who says if you study the history of the label conspiracy theory, it's really meant to say that you're not supposed to distrust people in power up to bad activities. That's how it's practically applied by institutional sources of authority in academia or the press. And because if you dig into the real history of quote unquote Pizzagate, it is, as Viva noted, rooted in the highly peculiar language used in the Podesta email release by WikiLeaks. And by the way, the language he was using did correspond to pre-existing police designations for sex trafficking involving children. And that's what led people to that conclusion. I was telling people at the time, I never jumped on it at all because I said that we don't know what that can mean a whole bunch of things. We don't know what it means. And people want to investigate it, God bless, but I wouldn't draw any conclusions from it, because of the nature of where those conclusions could go. And as one tiny piece of quote unquote Pizzagate, they identified one store in DC. By the way, there are unusual things about that owner of that store. People can research that themselves. So it wasn't like they were just like find pizza store in DC, accused of crime. It was more like they found someone that had a very unusual history in his other conduct and found other things unusual about artwork and other things he was interested in. And that's what led them to that particular store. There was also allegations of connections to David Brock and the owner of the store. So that's why they went there. And then what happened was a guy showed up with a gun trying to research to see if he could physically find something. They arrested him, and the media did a great job of lying about what Pizzagate was all about, of saying it was a very different story than it actually was. And they created a caricature image so that everybody was terrified to even say the words or talk about it or think about it again, which I said at the time, made me more suspicious, not less. I was like, if there's nothing there, there's no reason to behave this way.
No, and Mike Cernovich, it was with Mike Cernovich.
He got caught up in that, right? That's kind of what brought him down.
He got blamed for the incident, and he backed off of it, and I believe he even apologized for it, or the idea that he promoted what turned out to be that incident. But you just remember the emails where they're talking about a map on a napkin that they left behind, like. Who wants someone to bring them a napkin, and why are there so you don't have to go, you don't have to go all in on one interpretation. You just have to have critical thinking to say something they're talking about something, and it's not about what they're talking about.
Right.
A good person for this is
anybody who discusses it after that incident immediately gets lumped into this, this theory that had been ostracized by the mainstream media to a group of people who, by and large, did not know the details because the details had not been brought to their attention by the same mainstream media. It's just an amazing thing to live through. And
no doubt. I mean, a good person on this is Michael Malice, who's a pretty independent, impartial guy. And Malice will go on about this. And Malice's point is that clearly something was up, that clearly something correlated, that the language was, that, put it this way, the most reasonable explanation, consistent with all available evidence, was that this was referencing some sort of underage sexual activity. And then some of these people coincidentally turned out to be tied to Epstein. We're supposed to assume all of this is one big, huge coincidence. Remember, the same media would have told you 15 years ago that the conspiracy theories about Epstein were all crazy conspiracy theories.
15 years ago. They would have told you that 3 years ago when they're trying to score an interview with Prince Andrew. It's
exactly. By the way, there's a great, I think, Eric, I think you did a great interview with them. Those body language guys, they do a great body language breakdown. Their body language, like sometimes those body language people are like not very good. They say stuff that I know is not accurate.
I know the good ones.
These four guys are fantastic. Because I've been watching them because it's good for information, not only for obviously young lawyers or anyone else that's watching, but for anybody out there. By the way, the tells are that Biden clearly did harass Tara Reade. If you go through just the body language analysis that they do on both sides, based on other things they were saying in advance, they're like, if somebody's eyes start to suddenly blink right after they say something, that's usually a tell. Yeah, it's a tell of a deception. Well, it's like there's like 3 or 4 tells of deception. Biden does all of them when he's talking about denying Tara Reade. And whereas Tara Reid does a lot of the signs of not deception when she's describing the sexual assault against her. So I was like, wow, the media's done a good job of suppressing that. If she was accusing Donald Trump and Trump had responded that way, Tara Reid would have a statute built to her somewhere. I mean, the media comparison is unbelievable.
Well, they've torn her down. I mean, I don't know if she's good or bad, but I mean, her reputation has been pretty much trashed.
I have no doubt she's telling the truth, and Biden is lying. No, I've heard a lot of other stories about Biden, by the way. That's what Judicial Watch is digging into. That's secrets. Yeah, exactly. That Secret Service file that they're talking about digging into, that's the backstory. The backstory is Biden harassing the wife of a Secret Service agent at a party. And there were a bunch of those stories that circulated for years about Biden. And somehow that apparently, so Judicial Watch got the smart idea, let's get that file. Apparently the file exists, but it's gone missing from the
maybe it's on Hillary's server.
Yeah, exactly.
This is where everything, this is where ideas and discussion just become disregarded as bias, where when someone criticizes the fact that people believed Joe and didn't believe Tara Reid, and they say if it's biased to attack him for this, but at the same time, the positions they held with Kavanaugh and Blasey Ford, I mean, this is where you could be consistent throughout. And as I think, most rational people were, which is you give reasonable credence to the story until additional evidence comes in, and then you make a decision as to what is the most plausible or even what is the most fair interpretation. Sure. But to do that with one and then to utterly disregard it in the other, and then to be accused of bias for attempting to apply the same standard throughout, that's where you realize you can't have discussions with people who are going to espouse these beliefs or arguments, because it is in fact them who is irreparably compromised by bias, and all that they do is accuse you of it for attempting to apply the same standard across the board. Rant over.
We've got a super chat. If you look at the Google trends for fake news and Pizzagate and compare it for the last 5 years, it's pretty weird or damning. And that makes me think, you want to get meta with conspiracy theory? There's a conspiracy theory that the CIA created the term conspiracy theory in 1967.
Yeah, I actually looked into that recently because I was going to say it to somebody in a discussion, but I wasn't sufficiently sure about the history. But apparently, the memo that they referenced in the 1967 refers to conspiracy theory. I think one time in the memo, it wasn't like it was specifically concocted by the CIA to discredit deliberately anybody who espoused a belief that would reveal their criminality, unless I'm mistaken. Robert, I think you know more than me on everything.
I'll try to find the book and link it in the comments below. There's a great book that a liberal professor did on this. So he goes through the whole history. He does tie the idea of using conspiracy theory language to, he times how often the press started covering it to CIA Operation Mockingbird activities. He said originally actually directed overseas. He said originally didn't start. He goes, if you look at how often so while conspiracy theories have always existed and criticisms of conspiracy theories always existed, sure, that lingo and language applied in this particular politicized manner, he dated peaking to CIA related activities in the 1960s.
Was it Secret History of the 60s?
It's actually a book just about conspiracy theories, and his argument is that the way criticism of conspiracy theories have been applied since the 60s is disproportionately, because his point is all kinds of conspiracy theories get circulated all the time. He said the only things that get labeled conspiracy theory in a negative light by the institutional press or by the institutional academia is those theories that say people in power are up to secretly bad things.
Oh, as if, but the other thing is this, and I've been having this discussion with other people who call me a conspiracy theorist from time to time. I say, once you know the reality of certain things, the Muskegee tests, the Operation
Muskegee in Alabama.
Operation Mockingbird, Operation Northwoods. I mean, once you know of the MK Ultra, once you know that they were actually in Montreal kidnapping homeless people to administer drugs on them, once you know the reality, it takes a great deal of audacity to write someone off as a conspiracy theorist because they don't believe the official narrative of, say, 9/11. I mean, it actually takes a certain degree of ignorance or audacity to write someone's opinion off as a conspiracy theorist, knowing what actually has happened in real life that is confirmed now.
Operation Paperclip.
Oh, of course. I give great credit to the system's ability to get you to think, oh, if I'm saying people in power did, it's okay to have a conspiracy theory about poor people, about political dissidents, about outsiders, about foreign countries, about disfavored institutions or individuals. But if you somehow have a conspiracy theory that people who seek power and successfully obtain power, that somehow that's a conspiracy that you're never supposed to think. Or if you do, that means you're crazy or that you're not very smart. Then, I give the systems credit for creating that kind of logic out there. But by no means is it logical. There's nothing about that that's logical. In fact, just the opposite. Where I fundamentally agree with aspects of the utility and importance of Alex Jones's voice in the world is down deep. What separates him from everyone else, other than being a truly free press, no corporate control, no donor control, nothing, for his platform, the most free press in the world by far.
He is a little bit outlandish. I mean,
he's
I'm sorry, he does attract a bit of the.
People can be as critical as they want of Jones. My point with Jones is the other thing that separates him from everyone else is that he has a deep-seated belief that people who successfully seek and obtain power are disproportionately likely to do bad things to the rest of us. And that's where I think that mindset I want, because it doesn't mean you have to have that mindset, but I want to hear where that mindset leads, because the institutional media wants me to pretend that never happens. And I know that's not true. In fact, it doesn't even make sense. I was a scholarship kid at rich kid schools most of my life. And yeah, they're bad people. I wouldn't want them having power. I looked around at Yale and I was like, none of these people should be anywhere near power. And now they are.
It's the psychopath test, which was what I just the last book I read.
Ronson.
Yeah, John Ronson. I mean, it's an interesting thing. But speaking of conspiracy theories, I saw on Twitter the other day that if you go to your search engine and put in antifa.com, it goes to Joe Biden.
It does. That's a troll. I guarantee that somebody who's either friends with Trump or is on the Trump staff is smart, and they bought the freaking domain name or had it, and they're sending it. KeepAmericaGreat.com goes to Biden.
Okay. No, it's interesting because it happened, and it's not that I jumped on and this is checking one's bias if I have a bias. I didn't automatically assume that it's Joe Biden actually doing it because it would be the dumbest thing on earth. The question is, which side is pulling the troll? And do you think that people could discover who owns the domain for that and when it was purchased? Because
you have to dig. I mean, they could, pay to have it private, pay a little extra. It's not that much, but I'm sure that any detective worth their salt can probably hit a couple databases and figure it out.
I just don't know which way does that false flag fly? Because it's going.
Besides, though, if it's a person, well, here's the problem though. If it's a Joe Blow person who just is, a citizen, you don't necessarily know. Now, I'm guessing if they have, the Trump flags all over the yard, it'd be a clue.
Yeah.
My guess is, I would say likely troll, but not necessarily a Trump supporter, just because a lot of your Trump supporters have a hard time doing anything that helps Joe Biden raise money or Democrats raise money. It's just an instinct. It's one of those hurdles.
It could be a Bernie supporter.
Yeah, I could see a Bernie supporter. I could see just a troll doing it. A lot of your trolls,
Michael Malice owns it.
Yeah, exactly. Are apolitical. Down deep, they just enjoy trolling for trolling.
And now, speaking of which, you guys follow Jack Posobiec on Twitter? I know you do, Robert.
I think it's Jack Posobiec is how it's pronounced.
So he's been posting something, which is a TikTok account called One Life or something along those lines. If you follow it, it's a woman who has a partner, a lesbian partner, and she's the storyline that she is portraying in her most recent tweet stories, or not TikTok stories, is she's going back to Ohio, to convert her family who have turned into Trump supporters and to try to get them to vote Biden. Everything about it sounds like it was written by the Babylon Bee to be the exact opposite of what it's purporting to be. And I don't know if you guys have been following the story, but I'm waiting. She's done 2 videos. I'm waiting for the third, where it's going to be, I forget what the word is, but she's going to come up with a big reveal that this was all a parody or a troll, and the arguments that she was raising in the first 2 were so obviously what they were. But thus far, it seems to be a legitimate thing. If you haven't seen it, you got to go watch it, because it'll give you a good laugh and a good moment to reflect as to whether or not this is actual. She's genuine in the manner in which she's suggesting people deal with Trump supporters, or if it's a parody, false flag from the beginning.
It's getting harder now, though, because people are so ridiculous. It's like, oh, that's parrot. No, they're really They're really crazy.
It's the best. It's the best evidence for Elon Musk and Scott Adams being right that we're in a simulation. And that somebody took some shrooms before they started playing around. They're like, I got an idea. Let's make the reality TV guy president. I mean, you know what I mean? It started with that and just went from there.
Okay, I've got a question here from one of the members, Gavin Stone. Linked to Pizzagate. Now this is way beyond me. Is the alleged method of harvesting what's been labeled adrenochrome actually been confirmed, or is it still speculation?
All that is speculation. So the other place Pizzagate went was believing, and Jones sometimes goes there. And this is, you know, we don't. There's a lot of different theories that Alex has that I don't happen to share. I just like. I
was just building you up earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're tearing me down. There's a lot of people that way. It's fascinating. All the people, like, I've represented everybody across the entire political spectrum. Jones is the one that inspires the most polarized responses. And I'm like, I've represented actual commies, socialists, libertarians, independents, Ralph Nader. He used to polarize people. Jill Stein, Green Party, Libertarian Party, Tea Party, Taxpayers Party, quote unquote tax protesters. But somehow, Covington kids, helped out Trump people, but by golly, say Alex Jones, and the reactions just go off the charts.
How about Roger Stone? He's got to be up there with Jones.
Yeah, I never represented Roger. Roger and I both. Yeah, like Joe Francis. That used to be controversial. The Girls Gone Wild guy. That's it's public knowledge. I won't go into any further detail, but I didn't like him. He's the one client I truly did not like. But Roger was along for the ride for that whole long story. You could forecast Roger's future by how he handled things in that. But yeah, it's fascinating to me, and it's mostly, in my view, people having a caricatured view of Jones, because most of the critics I run into, it reminds me of my critics of Limbaugh. About 80 to 90% of their criticism will be things that don't accurately reflect most of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So, like Jones has been one of the biggest critics of Q. Jones has been one of the biggest critics when they were trying to say that
QAnon.
QAnon. Been one of the bigger critics and there's people still mad at me because I was just on the show with Jones questioning a QAnon guy. I feel bad mostly for the QAnon people. I think some of them are nice people. I think some are being misled. I think some are misdirected. But I think most of them, the reason why they believe what they believe is because they want to believe that the president they elect actually controls the executive branch. And they find impossible the idea that that's not true.
Well, I think it's being proven right now, because
there's no doubt about it.
Even Barr, people would be like, even Barr's not really doing his bidding.
Oh, not at all. In fact, if anything, he's contra on a lot of things. But I understand. But the core, it's fascinating where people really get agitated on with Jones, which is fascinating to me, because one, Jones spends almost all his time attacking elite people over 25 years.
The frogs are going to turn gay.
Yeah, but like that criticism, like that's what I find fascinating. Like that criticism was actually accurate. What he was criticizing was animal experimentation for sexual change and for not being able to reconceive, and animal human hybrids. He was talking about
memeable.
Yeah,
he's
it's
loud and
definitely
memeable. So it's easy.
He's dramatic. He's an entertainer. He's funny. He was having to worry about trying to eat his neighbors during the pandemic. There's all that, the fun,
him and
crazy.
Cenk Winger.
No, but that's the thing is there has been it with Alex Jones. People have said stupid things. I mean, you've had Alyssa Milano saying some outrageous things. I think you had Cher at one point, say that the sun was the flip side of the moon. It was the concerted effort of the media to deplatform him and then talk about him on the platforms from which he had been removed, so that there's no one there to defend him. It's first, and the other thing is like saying things in an inflammatory way or an unscientific way. It makes for easy ridicule, but setting aside the whole the big issue with Jones, the Sandy Hook incident, he said it still is not entirely explainable the degree to which he's been demonized by the media for the things that he said, which are untenable.
I think he's the one person though who doesn't have any real support. He's untethered.
Well, he doesn't have any institutional support. But what I point out to my friends on the left is you could have equally, it would have been easy to go after. Rush Limbaugh has said more controversial things. Michael Savage has said more controversial things. Tucker Carlson has said more controversial things. There's a whole bunch of people that have said more controversial things. But what separates out, it's always my argument to my friends on the left, is you guys, the left targeting Jones makes zero sense, because the loudest voice on the right that's pro Julian Assange, pro Ed Snowden, anti-surveillance state, opposed every war that's come down the pike, opposed Syrian intervention, Afghanistan intervention, both Iraqi wars, Iranian intervention, opposed the going into Venezuela. The only guy that has done that with the loudest and strongest voice by far on the right is Alex Jones. And it's not a coincidence that it's the anti-war, anti-surveillance state, anti-establishment Jones that is the target for controversial statements. Now, they're smart politically. They don't target those statements. They target somewhere where the left can jump on board with the targeting. But it's extraordinary how much Jones has been deplatformed and really depersonified. And in my view, it's not a coincidence that the only thing that really separates him from other people on the right is not controversial statements he's made, but his anti-war, anti-establishment. I mean, William Binney's the biggest whistleblower in the history of the NSA. The number one network he's ever appeared on in the last 20 years, Alex Jones and InfoWars. Not a coincidence. So that I think is what is the real reason Jones is targeted.
Real quick callback. We brought up John Ronson earlier. You know that John Ronson and Alex Jones went together for that weird ass festival where they had the burning owl and they burn everybody or burn things in effigy.
You're not talking about Burning Man. This is
no.
This is the secret society in San Francisco that meets every year.
I can't remember the name. And no, it's real. He snuck in there with a camera. Yeah. It was John Ronson and Alex Jones. But
in fact, every president until Trump has been a member of either that group or Bilderberg. Until Trump. Trump is the first one since the 1950s. This is why
I'm glad I'm not even a member of a golf club.
I was around all these rich kids from the time I was young, and I can just tell you that they acculturate them very well. Like in the South, we used to have something called the cotton ball, and the whole point of the cotton ball was to acculturate the elite to recognize they're part of a self-defined class that should look after each other. You don't need a big conspiracy. You just make sure people think the same way and look out for each other that are different than the rest of the world. And that is how the world works, and pretending otherwise is a big lie the media tells. Like the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he doesn't exist.
And Scott Adams' more recent tweet, the greatest trick the MSM or the fake news ever pulled was convincing the world they're not fake news.
Exactly. Very true.
All right. This is a callback, I think, to Viva's latest video. That was Mayor Heidman, right?
Look at this. The video's got 53,000 views in about 2 hours.
Holy moly! Somebody must be shit. Wow.
The guy. So, Robert, I mean, you've seen the video of Fred Heidman losing it on the police.
This one I haven't. I've been distracted by some other news we'll get into later. Reading some interesting lawsuits.
Long story short, it's Misswa. It's a town in Minnesota. The mayor comes to the cops. He crosses the highway. The cops have just pulled a car over, and it's just a verbal tirade. Like, what the F are you doing? You guys are effing incompetent. Why are you pulling this guy over? Get the F out of here. It's incomprehensible reaction. And so they arrested him and charged him with disorderly conduct and with obstruction of legal process. So I just did a video. It's sort of just exposing the situation and explaining the situation and the charges. But
will you serve time, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he'll pay a fine, but at best, he says he's going to defend it. But even his defense makes no sense and actually confirms the allegations. Nobody goes to jail for that, nor should he. But he should definitely pay a fine and maybe not be reelected, or maybe I don't know how you get rid of a mayor in the States. But the behavior was inexplicable and unjustifiable and inexcusable. It's just
he reeked of arrogance. I mean, the video really just showed that. But calling back real quickly, Bohemian Grove. I forgot the name of it, but that's it.
That's the secret society in San Francisco. They get together and do a bunch of weird stuff. It's all men. They go out in the wood. But what is all those institutions? I mean, at Yale, Skull and Bones. I knew people that were in Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones is a freaky little group. It's like they started their rituals based on an old German death society, death worship society. You get inside a casket and all this other stuff. But the whole point of Skull and Bones is to acculturate you to a certain mindset. You're going to look after certain people. You get accustomed to handling secrets well. When people say, oh, secrets like this could never be sustained, just look at the history of the world. Secrets have been sustained for hundreds of years. The idea that you can't keep a secret, that's nonsense. Plenty of people can keep a secret.
I do believe in Franklin on that a little bit, though. The only way to keep secret is if somebody's dead.
Well, that's the best way to keep a secret, but in some circles. But for the most part, self-interest motivates you plenty. All you have to do is corrupt somebody, and you're gonna keep a secret. And so right now there's issues with a prominent lawyer who everybody that worked for that prominent lawyer had known he's nuts for years, and only now is it going public because that prominent lawyer kept threatening them that he would ruin their lives because he was the Almighty.
Okay, so come on, you spill it. Everybody else tune in on Sunday with you guys anyway.
Yeah, I'll probably conserve judgment with all the details, but there's the two lawyers that are involved in raising money for Rittenhouse have major problems and have no business involved in the case. It's that simple. Lynn Wood went out and solicited the case, even though he has no background in state criminal defense. He got John Pierce involved, even though he has no business in no background in state criminal defense that I know of. In fact, I don't know if either one of them have ever won a big trial in their lives that I know of. Nobody else seems to. And they create like a 501c4 that takes like a year to actually get approved. It's not a great way to raise funds for a legal defense fund. And the first extradition hearing comes and nobody shows up for him but a public defender. So he's stuck in jail for another month with no bond, no bail. Bad situation for a kid to be in, period.
He is, Robert, he is still in jail, Kyle?
Yes. He's in jail until the end of the month in Illinois. They delayed for a month. They said they were flying in to represent him. That didn't happen. The only images that have come out is, him talking to the lawyer, John Pierce, the mother hugging the lawyer. This does not look like the way you should do a case. John Pierce appears on Tucker Carlson, does not make a good impression. And I just started I wanted to stay out of this. I wanted to make sure Rittenhouse, got good counsel and got acquitted as he should be. Frankly, the charges should be dismissed. I may have another way of dealing with that. I might look at finding somebody that's going to run against that prosecutor in Kenosha, though that may be 4 years away because apparently he has no competition right now for the general election. I might see if somebody will run independent. If I'm ticked off enough, maybe I'll get to that down the road.
You're not going to go represent him?
I would represent him if his family asked, of course. But there are very good Wisconsin lawyers involved, are willing to be involved. And they were voicing concern to me about what was happening. There's a top-notch lawyer that does a lot of criminal defense out of Louisiana that's done cases across the country, that's trained in state criminal defense as well. He was bothered by what was going on. I had all kinds of lawyers starting to reach out to me saying, this doesn't look right. There's lawyers running this case that have no background in this area of law. They appear to be raising lots of money in an unusual way for a legal defense fund. There's no guarantee of all that money going to the kid or his mother, who are their poor family.
Robert, two questions, actually, because someone was asking me this. First of all, who mandates the attorneys? The kid's 17. Can he do it, or does his mother have to do it?
Oh, no, he can do it.
Okay.
Either he can do it or his mom can do it, or both. And the concern was that what appears to have taken place is people have hijacked the case by controlling the legal defense fund for the kid for the kid. And that looks very bad. So I came out. So there was so much bombardment of all the messages I was getting from so many people. And I've had my disagreements with Lynn Wood in the past. I have kept them minimal because it was not in my client's interest in the Covington case to get into a public dispute with Lynn Wood. He kept provoking it. He kept initiating it. Made false statements about me. Other people did too. And I was just trying to stay away from it because it was not helpful to his client, more so than even mine, Nick Sandman.
It was helpful to the media and Fox News who made it a big story for.
Yes, of course. And all the left media people were going to make hay out of it. I kept telling them this is a bad idea for their client, Nick Sandman. It didn't look good. There was no utility to this. If I have to defend myself, I will. It will look not good for them. And so I try to stay out of it and but my experience with him was not a positive one in dealing with the Covington cases. Made my job harder. I had to file suit sooner in order to preserve everybody's rights, had to get in front of the federal court. And luckily we did in such a time that the federal court reversed its decision on Sandman based largely on arguments that I was making on behalf of my clients. So and stayed quiet about all of it and was going to just stay quiet. I hate lawyer drama. I know lawyers can get falsely accused of things. I've been targeted by everybody. Like when lawyers or someone else thinks, some YouTube kid thinks they're going to run a defamation campaign against me, I'm like, they got to step in. They got to get in line to attack me. There's a line there, and they got to step up in class. I've had rogue FBI agents come after me, rogue prosecutors come after me, federal and state. I've had rogue IRS agents come after me, rogue DHS agents come after me, rogue United States Marshals come after me. I've had, because I've exposed corruption almost every level of government, I've had people who decided to reward me for that by trying to silence me by threats and intimidation. And those are real threats and intimidation. Walk out with your client out of court and get jumped by an FBI agent and a U.S. Marshal threatening to put you in prison for life and take away your license based on totally manufactured false charges. That's a threat. That's a threat you pay attention to. Now, I've got a weird sense of fear, so I don't. But I was going to ask
that. I was like, so what? Do you have blackmail or what?
No. What it is really is they do this psychological test where you're walking through the woods. It's a great test, by the way. It's a test to sneak people on. I had a fiance. I gave the test to, and I was like, oh, that was the wrong answer. She gave me but basically it's you're going through the woods. You come to a house. Well, you describe the house. You go in. There's a cup on the table. What's the cup like? Do you keep the cup? You walk out of the house into the woods. You see a wall. How tall is it? How do you get around it? Then you get past it. Then you come to a bear. How big is the bear? What kind of bear is it? How do you respond to it? And then you get down to a water and how they describe water. It tells a lot of interesting stuff. That's another story. How big is it? How deep is it? How fast is it? They'll tell you fascinating stories. They have no idea what they're telling. And then they go past that. They see a horse. If a woman describes a horse in a certain way, she's describing certain things. So you find out all kinds of man to.
Yeah, assuming you buy into any of this psychoanalysis, yeah. But
it turns out I've found to be incredibly accurate. So one of those you come to and people can look up the test and there's different interpretations. But in my experience, that particular test is strikingly educational and informative. Sometimes in surprising and disappointing ways, sometimes in happy ways. Sometimes the girlfriend's going to tell you that she's very materialistic, it turns out. So you better get that prenup ready. But so as you're walking through the woods, you get to a bear, and the bear apparently represents fear. Well, when I took the test to this psychology graduate student, I described the bear. Most people describe the bear apparently as a big brown or black bear of varying sizes who they respond to by various methods of avoidance. I described a koala bear that wanted to go up and hug. And so apparently that's my reaction to fear is I want to go and hug the fear. So and that's deeply accurate because sometimes I look back on my life and I don't even understand why I did what I did. But so when you've been threatened by those kind of people, some lawyer starts talking smack. It means nothing to you. But I was concerned about protecting the Covington kid, so I didn't go into that brouhaha publicly. But now the problem is the Covington case, Wood is mostly settling those cases, so there's no longer a big conflict there that I have to worry about. And whereas you have Rittenhouse, you have a kid's life is on the line. And this is the point different people were making to me, that I was in a different position to speak out, that something needed to be spoken out about to fix and correct this in advance before this kid's life is ruined because he doesn't get bond, because he gets a bail amount that he can't post. In Wisconsin has bail rather than bond. There's bond in Illinois for extradition. There's bail for Wisconsin. The last case like this got over $1 million bail out of Kenosha County. So he's probably looking at $1 million to $3 million bail. Now, ultimately, that one was lowered to $400,000, but only after people raise the political stink, which is why there needs to be a massive political stink. I would already be starting a recall campaign against that. I mean,
Robert, you've seen what now on Facebook, apparently any posts or links defending Rittenhouse are being taken down and blocked. But actually, Robert, one other question about Rittenhouse, and I got a text that I might have to go in 2 or 3 minutes to.
No, we've run over. We got to wrap it up.
Robert,
this is the last statement.
Question people are asking: Rittenhouse, how can someone get simultaneously charged for a crime that requires him to be underage, and then at the same time charged as an adult for another crime?
I think it's a prosecutorial choice in Wisconsin. So that's the nature of it. Now, my view is they're going to drop that misdemeanor charge because the statute is clear that he had a right to have the gun. By the way, that's what should have been defended on Tucker. I mean, that was where a lot of the concerns started coming out. That the defense on Tucker was that the militia statute authorized it. I understand where they're going, and there's a constitutional argument but you don't need to go there in Wisconsin. That's a backup position. And from a court of public opinion perspective, don't compare this kid to being part of a militia. That plays in
that's going to feed into the
McVeigh and Ruby Ridge and all that.
That's
complete mistake. And so when people saw that, and then now Lynn Wood is being sued by almost everybody who worked in his law firm with some very frightening allegations made in that suit. John Pierce is facing all kinds of lawsuits related to his cases. All of the cases in various respects allege mishandling of funds. So all I said to Pierce and to Wood publicly was promise everybody that you're going to start giving all the money to Kyle and his mom so that they can pick legal counsel of their choice, so that they have money for bail and bond for the kid. There's a good extradition defense that can be made here, by the way, in Illinois, so that he could stay there potentially while that gets litigated, while politically the temperature is cool in Kenosha. And third, they're going to need money for their own safety and security. So, it's going to be very hard for the mom to work over time. It's going to be very hard for the kid to work while this case is going on. Sooner or later, they're going to have cameras surrounding their house. So they need to be in a safer location, an anonymous location where they don't have to work, where they're able to be secure while this case is proceeding and progressing. And my understanding is over $600,000 has been raised by Lynn Wood's group for Rittenhouse. I know over $300,000 has been raised by a church group. So you're talking about close to $1 million. So that's more than enough to do all three of those things. Like a good Wisconsin criminal defense lawyer, max fee is $250,000 to handle this case. And then you can have an Illinois extradition lawyer for probably $25 to $50, some investigator and security people for another $50. And you should be in a position where you have enough to cover both bail and cover the family's living expenses while this occurs. My concern is that lawyers that are facing financial problems will have those fees monies won't go back to the family. So that's what other people's concerns are. I think both John Pierce and Lynn Wood may have the very best of intentions here. And so my point to them was just clear this up in advance and you'll chill everybody out, and then bring in people who understand state criminal defense and let someone else be the face of operations. John Pierce is not the guy.
Well, folks, this has been wonderful. We've ran over anyway. Thank you both so much, David, Viva Frei.
My pleasure.
Robert Barnes, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you so much. Thanks for the super chat and the memberships. I really appreciate it. And just please tell a friend and subscribe if you're not already.
And Robert, I'll see Robert Sunday. And Eric, I will see you on the social medias in the future.
Absolutely.